But other than Ronald Reagan himself, I don't think anybody played a bigger or more important role in bringing the Republican Party back from the brink than our speaker tonight. Newt Gingrich came up, and this is a surprise, came up with a notion of a conservative opportunity society. He defined it in ways Americans could understand. He went on C-SPAN day after day after day to promote it, gig the Democrats every way he could, and expose the corruption of then Speaker of the House, Jim Wright. He simply refused to believe Republicans had to be a permanent minority in Congress. But first, we had to stop acting like it. We had to stop being satisfied with crumbs from the table. It wasn't enough to get some conservative Southern Democrat to vote with us on an occasional amendment. We had to beat that person and replace him with a Republican. Once that point was clear, big gains were possible. And in 1994, the stars aligned, and Newt came up with the Contract with America. The Democrats, oh, I love them, they foolishly attacked it, and the race was on. When the dust settled, much to the astonishment of the media, Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the first Republican House since Eisenhower's first term. Now you watch Newt on Fox, or read his books, or watch the wonderful video like the one you saw earlier that he and Callista produce, and you say to yourself what we all said when we first met him back in the 70s. He's really good. His ideas, that mind of his big vision, his courage, that's leadership, folks, and I'm so glad he's here with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Newt Gingrich.
Thank you all very, very much. As you can tell from that introduction, when Susan and Jay let me know that I was coming here, I said yes, because, you know, some people are just family, and you sort of have to do it. And we go back long enough that we clearly fit in the family tradition. I'm glad to be here. What you've accomplished in this county is remarkable, and I think is a signal of what we're going to accomplish across this country in 2012. Our number one goal is to win so big in 2012 that everybody understands that 2010 was the beginning, not the peak. We need to pick up at least 40 more seats in the U.S. House, at least a dozen seats in the U.S. Senate. We need to win the governorship in North Carolina. Remember, if we're going to have a 10th Amendment implementation bill to return power to the states, we want to have conservatives in government in the states who return power to the people. We don't want to have liberals who then grab all of it and make the state as bad as Washington used to be. And finally, of course, we have to win the presidency. But just as Ronald Reagan owed a great deal of his success to Jimmy Carter, and if you've seen the movie Callista and I did on Rendezvous with Destiny about Ronald Reagan's life, there's a very brief segment that has Carter in there just to remind you how much he helped. So I think the scale of the Republican victory in 2012 will owe a great deal to President Barack Obama. Now, no president in my lifetime has worked as hard to make it clear why we need a new president. We have a serious problem in our economy. We have a serious problem with the price of gasoline. We have an enormous $2 trillion deficit. We have conflict in Libya. We have a challenge in Japan. And the spectator-in-chief shares with us his Final Four pick and then goes to Brazil to kick a soccer ball. Now, I actually think we need a president who would like to be president. And some of this is personality and the fact that, enthusiastic, well-meaning amateurs find it very hard to learn at the level of the presidency on the job. But part of it is fundamental differences about the nature of the world. Let me give you a couple of examples. President Obama goes to Brazil, and he says, and we're going to do a YouTube on this in the near future that you will love. He says, "I'm so glad you're drilling offshore." And of course, the U.S. government has given $2 billion in loan guarantees to the Brazilians to be able to buy the equipment to drill offshore. And then the president says, "We really want to be your customer." Now, I just want to give you a conservative, pro-American alternative. Imagine you went to Brazil and said, "Isn't it terrific that we're drilling offshore even more than you are?" And for that matter, drilling onshore, the development in shale gas. We've gone from 10 years supply to over 100 years supply in natural gas in the last 10 years because of technology. We now can find gas we couldn't find. Imagine the president went to Brazil and said, "It is terrific that we're giving American companies precisely the same breaks to get equipment for work in the U.S. that we were giving you, and therefore our companies are not at a disadvantage in competing with you." And imagine an American president went to Brazil and said, "Hi, we would like you to be our customers so we could make money and have jobs selling to you." The Obama model of the economy is that we borrow money from the Chinese so we can give it to the Brazilians with no American jobs in between. That's not sustainable. I mean, it's bad enough when your 13-year-old uses the family credit card and doesn't realize that there's this second phase called payment. But to have a president of the United States who doesn't understand this is really very sobering. But consider the second example he's given us in the last few weeks. Whatever you think of the Libyan engagement, and I'll talk about it in a minute, imagine an American president who says to you, "I have the authority of the United Nations and the Arab League." Now, I was intrigued because I'm a historian by training, and I've written a number of books on the American founding fathers, 2 novels on Washington, a book called Rediscovering God in America about the Declaration and the Constitution. So I went back and checked in the Constitution. I couldn't find the Arab League. I mean, since he's a Harvard Law graduate and was, he's the editor of the Harvard Law Review. He's a very smart man. I'm really hoping that he will sort of share with the nation what clause has the Arab League in it, or what clause has the United Nations in it. I mean, American presidents consult with the United States Congress and then do what is in the sovereign interest of the United States. We don't worry about a collection of dictators who get together randomly to tell us whether or not they approve of what we're doing. Now, I want to talk about the three large areas in which I think we want to focus on drawing a contrast between how we would lead America and how we would solve problems as a Republican Party and what President Obama is doing. I'm going to talk about values. I want to talk about the economy, jobs, and energy. And I'm going to talk about national security. Let's talk about values first, because that's really where it starts. We pledged allegiance to the flag. We talked about one nation under God, which is the phrase which comes from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which Lincoln personally wrote in by hand as he was sitting on the platform looking out at the First National Military Cemetery in November of 1863. Part of what got me back into public life was when the Ninth Circuit Court ruled that saying one nation under God as a pledge in public school was unconstitutional. I thought that was such a historically ignorant and fundamentally anti-American decision that required an intellectual response. So I wrote a little book called Rediscovering God in America. And the entire book's just historic. It's not theological, it's not religious, it's historic. And it starts with the following facts. And I think facts matter. Lincoln once said that if a man can assert that 2 + 2 equals anything but 4, and you can't get him to quit doing it, you can't possibly win the argument, because facts have no meaning. And so I think facts really matter. It is a fact that if you go to the National Archive, you can see the original Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is a political document. It's not a theological document. It explained why we were breaking with Great Britain. It begins by saying we hold these truths to be self-evident. The word truth is important here. The Founding Fathers were not out there with a philosophy. They were not out there with an ideology. They were sincerely trying to figure out the truth of how people can govern themselves. They said we're all created equal, and we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this is the most extraordinary moment in American history, because here you have a group of people who've gathered together who say that power comes from God to each one of you personally. You're personally sovereign. That's why America is exceptional. It's not because we're bigger, stronger. It's because we are the one society in history which says power actually resides in the citizen as a grant from God. The citizen is sovereign, and the citizen loans power to the state. The state does not loan power to the citizen. The Founding Fathers thought they were codifying rights which were pre-existing. That is, they weren't rights that came out of the Continental Congress. They weren't rights that came out of the Constitution. If you read the Second Amendment, it basically says the right to bear arms. It stipulates it already exists. It's not being recognized by the state. The job of the state is not to infringe on it. You have a right to religious liberty. And of course, the 10th Amendment comes from a deliberate effort to keep Washington small by saying that all powers not expressly given to the federal government belong to the states and the people thereof. Now, we've had, since 1932, a continuous erosion of the American system. We've had a centralization of power in Washington. We've had a growing elite, which in our universities, in our bureaucracies, in our courts, in our news media, have been less and less aware of the American experience. And we're at a great choice. I think the election of 2012 will rival 1860 and 1932 as one of the great moments in American history. Now, you should feel very confident. Cliss and I did a movie called 9 Days to Change the World about Pope John Paul II going back to Poland in 1979 because we were told by Lech Wałęsa and Václav Havel, the president of Poland and the president of Czechoslovakia, that the decisive moment in breaking the Soviet Empire was June 2nd, 1979, a year and a half before Reagan's elected, when the Pope goes back home. The very first morning, 3 million people come out to Victory Square in Warsaw, and they look around, and they're there for Mass. This is a dictatorship. Now, it's hard to realize how bad this dictatorship was. It would not allow children to pray in school, and it kept tearing down crosses. So you can imagine how oppressed they felt. And the people looked around each other. In our movie, we have several Poles who were there who say, you know, we looked around and we suddenly realized there are more of us than there are of the government. Why are we afraid of them? Now, I found that to be an amazingly useful moment. Let me give you the numbers from Gallup 2 months ago. When Gallup asked, do you think the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence make the United States an exceptional country, or do you think we're a normal country? It was 80 to 18. Our job is not to go out and convince people to be Americans. Our job is to go out to every neighborhood of every ethnic background, of every culture, and gather up everybody who already believes it. That would give us approximately a 4-to-1 margin. Now that means that after the New York Times and MSNBC are done, after the labor unions are done, after the Democratic machine is done, we'd only probably have a 3-to-1 margin. But 3-to-1 would be enough. You could govern with 3-to-1. Now, how do you turn that into practicality? First, every state should adopt a law requiring that the Declaration of Independence be taught every single year, K through 12, and be taught in every tax-paid school and college and university in the state. Let the ACLU try to come to grips with how to teach the word creator. All we have to do is describe accurately what Jefferson, Washington, and Adams and others meant by it. And they clearly meant God. Second, notice what we're endowed with. The right to pursue happiness. It doesn't say the right to be happy. And happiness in the Scottish Enlightenment, where Jefferson got the phrase, meant wisdom and virtue, not hedonism and acquisition. And the Founding Fathers all believed that a wise people could remain free, but a foolish people would end up in a dictatorship. But it's the right to pursue. There's no provision in the Declaration of Independence for a federal Department of Happiness. We're not guaranteed an outcome. There's no provision for happiness stamps so the under-happy can somehow be compensated. There's no provision for a right to sue if you're unhappy. There's no provision in the Declaration of Independence. I mean, the Founding Fathers would have thought it strange for a politician to walk into a room like this and say, I'm now going to take from the overly happy and redistribute to the underly happy. Now, being endowed with rights by your Creator also means you're endowed with responsibilities of citizenship. And we need to go back and say that and teach it and not be afraid of it. The right to pursue happiness implies the work ethic, because how can you truly be an American without the work ethic? And we need to have an argument about this. I'll give you an example. When I helped pass welfare reform after 30 years of debate, first proposed by Governor Ronald Reagan in 1966, we passed it in 1996. We had so decisively won the argument that 92% of the American people favored welfare reform. We had concluded that giving people money for doing nothing was destructive, that it taught bad habits, and that they gave the children a really bad role model. And so 2 out of 3 people on welfare went to work or went to school. Yet today, we have an unemployment compensation program which gives people up to 99 weeks for doing nothing, which is a fundamental violation of welfare reform. And so I propose that we turn unemployment compensation into a worker training program, and you only get the money if you sign up for a training program offered by a business which will train you to actually have a job. Because if you had 99 weeks of training, you would be enormously more productive. We'd be dramatically improving human capital. And remember, this is a $134 billion expenditure last year for which we got nothing. And I think we should not pay people to do nothing. I think it is fundamentally wrong, and so we need a new approach. So I think on the values front, we offer the American tradition of being endowed by our Creator. Obama and his team offer the European socialist tradition of being endowed by the government. We offer the 10th Amendment to bring power back home. They offer the EPA bureaucracy to keep all the power in Washington. We offer a program of free enterprise that creates jobs and paychecks. They offer a program of redistribution in which bureaucrats send out food stamps. And I believe that paychecks will beat food stamps every time in this country as a future, and we should have the courage to say that. I want to challenge you. I don't believe in this county or any place in this state that there is a neighborhood you couldn't go door to door and say, would you rather your children had food stamps or a paycheck? And you wouldn't have an overwhelming majority say, you know, I wish they had a paycheck. And when you have 45% black teenage unemployment in this country, it is not right. We can do better, and we should have a system where every young American has a chance to get a job and earn a paycheck, not be trapped by government. Second, we need a real program for the economy, for jobs, and for energy. Now, this is not magic. Coming out of the movie 9 Days to Change the World, we learned that the Solidarity movement, they fought with the Soviets for 10 years. The Pope comes June 2nd, 1979. They have their first free election June 4th, 1989. So for 10 years, they're in a struggle with the dictatorship. And one of the things they did during the struggle is they put up a poster that said, in Polish, that says, we have a copy in my office that we got, that's an original Solidarity poster, that said, for Poland to remain Poland, 2 + 2 must always equal 4. And they came at it from a couple of angles. One was that Camus had written in his novel, The Plague, there are times when a man can be killed for saying 2 + 2 = 4 because the authorities can't stand the truth. And I think the whole reaction of the Obama team to honest reports on Obamacare is an example of that. I think the whole reaction of our elites to honest conversations about radical Islamists is an example of that. Second, Orwell, who was a left-wing intellectual, but who had come to the conclusion that Hayek was right and that there was a road to serfdom and that centralized planning and bureaucracy led us to serfdom. And Orwell decided that the British Labour government had in it the roots of dictatorship. And so he writes a novel that's very famous called 1984. And he kept making the point, this is not about Moscow. But 1984 takes place in London. And in his novel, he has the torturer on behalf of the state say to the innocent citizen, if we tell you 2 + 2 = 5, it equals 5. If we tell you 2 + 2 = 3, it equals 3. And the citizen's thinking, but what if it really equals 4? But they're tired of being tortured. So now we come to America Today. I had American Solutions put together this bumper sticker. It's bold, it's out at the edge. We did it because we wanted, I think this is the most important governing political slogan of the next 25 years. It's very simple. It's 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, you can either get one from Solutions or you can make your own. It's not too hard. You can go around your neighborhood, you can show it to your neighbors. If they agree, make sure they register to vote. Now, why does 2 + 2 = 4 matter? Because I want to slow the conversation for the whole country down to some very simple premises. Would you like to have more jobs? People will nod yes. Okay, well then why don't we adopt a program that would get us more jobs? People start to nod yes. But then you have to think about what would that program be? If you benchmark in the world market, China, India, and Germany, and I always add Germany because Germany pays 50% more for manufacturing work and has the lowest unemployment rate since 1992. So they are a higher cost producer than we are, but they're so productive and they are so focused on exports that they have everybody working. There's a lot to learn from that. So then you say to yourself, well, if you benchmark China and India, what do we have to fix to be competitive? You have to fix 7 things: litigation, regulation, taxation, education, health, energy, and infrastructure. That's a lot. Not impossible, just a lot. Remember, I wrote 2 novels about Pearl Harbor. The Japanese attack us on December 7th, 1941. They surrender in August 1945. The entire Second World War from the American experience is 3 years and 8 months. I talked yesterday in Houston, Texas, to an El Paso pipeline company whose regulatory process to build a new pipeline is 4.5 years. So the U.S. government today makes them go through paperwork longer than the entire Second World War. And we wonder why we're not competitive? Off Louisiana, you can't drill for oil right now because while there's no moratorium, there's a brand new permitting system, and they don't issue any permits. But there is no moratorium. You just can't get a permit. You know, we wonder why we have a problem getting jobs. The leading barbershop clipper manufacturer in the world is located near Ronald Reagan's birthplace. Cliss and I met him. We went out to Tampico and Dixon, Illinois for the 100th anniversary of Reagan's birth, and we had a lunch with a bunch of business leaders. And he runs a factory that has 800 people in Illinois, and he runs a second factory with 400 people in China. His American factory is more productive than his Chinese factory. He has not had a layoff in 36 years. He uses lean manufacturing. He has 300 competitors worldwide, and he believes he can meet the customer and meet the price better than anybody else in the world. He then said to me in passing, oh, by the way, the tariff for my Illinois-built clipper to go into China is 40%. The tariff for my Chinese-built clipper to come into the U.S. is 4%. Now that says to me, we need a totally new approach to the U.S. trade representative, and one of my commitments would be to find the meanest, toughest trial lawyer in America. We also need to have dramatic, bold litigation reform where it is not a disaster to deal with the American tort system, and where we are not driving jobs out of the U.S. and driving doctors out of medicine by having predatory trial lawyers who go after them purely and simply for the purpose of getting money. This has nothing to do with justice. I mean, all of you have seen the ads where somebody comes on and goes, "Hi, do you know somebody with money that we could mug together? Why don't you drop by for a free consultation, and then let's go hunting together?" This teaches exactly the wrong patterns. America was a country of cooperation, of common sense, of rapid movement. We were not a country, you know, the guys who organized wagon trains didn't have their lawyers negotiate for 3 years to create a 704-page contract. And since 1963, we've gotten, it's entirely a modern deviation from the norm. And we need to go back and have very profound tort reform. And then on taxes, it's pretty straightforward. If you want to have more investment and more jobs, you need a tax code which favors more investment and more jobs. It's the opposite of Obama's position. I mean, Obama's position is, let me frighten everybody who's productive and then be surprised they don't invest. People say to me, you know, companies have trillions of dollars currently in cash, and that's true, because they're all afraid to invest. Why would you invest under this administration? You have no idea what their policies will be. When one of the big, deep rigs that was drilling left the Gulf, this was a company that was an independent company that wasn't afraid of the White House. They issued the following statement. Because of political instability in the United States, we are now going to drill off the Congo. Now, do you know how hard the Obama administration had to work to get that? So let's talk about what would a pro-jobs tax code be like? Well, you want to compete with China? Let's adopt the Chinese capital gains rate. It's 0. At 0 capital gains, would you like to guess how many jobs you'd create at 0 capital gains? How much investment there'd be in the United States? Let's look at the Irish corporate tax rate. It's 12.5%. And frankly, until the Irish had a big bank bubble, they'd had the best economic 50 years in the history of Ireland. If you'd really like American workers to have the most modern machinery, to be the most productive in the world, you'd go to 100% expensing and you could write every new piece of equipment off in 1 year. And I'm very prepared to have a debate where we stand for every American worker having the newest machinery with the greatest productivity to have the best jobs to export in the world against anybody, and let them be for trapping businesses into old, obsolete machinery while we lay off Americans and ship the factories to China. And finally, I think the time has come to permanently abolish the death tax because it is an immoral, destructive, anti-cultural tax. You know, the amazing thing that's so hard to get across to liberal reporters and editorial writers is that most of the people who just stood and applauded are never going to pay the death tax. Now, the objective reality is, you know, relatively few people pay it. Yet over almost 80% of the American people have favored abolishing it for the last 30 years as a cultural matter for 2 reasons. The first is just a deep instinct that it is wrong to have to see the IRS and the Undertaker the same week, and there's something just gruesomely wrong about a government that greedy. But the other is, I think, a deep psychological belief among Americans in the right to pursue happiness, and the idea that if you work your entire lifetime, you save your entire lifetime, you do everything right your entire lifetime, what right does a politician have to reach into your wallet the day you die and take away your money? And frankly, if we're going to create American jobs, we need to focus on American energy. We can't keep shipping $400 or $500 billion overseas, much of it to people who hate us. It is very foolish for us. I was with, Clifton and I had lunch with Secretary of State George Shultz, who was Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State. We were at the Reagan Library for the 100th birthday. And he said to us, he said, how long do we have to get hit over the head with a 2x4 to realize we need a national energy policy to get free from the Persian Gulf and to get free from Venezuela? And a national energy policy, this is very hard to get, you know, President Obama can't quite say these words. A national energy policy means an American energy policy, not a Brazilian energy policy. for all of the above. I am for oil, I am for gas, I am for nuclear power, I am for biofuels, I am for coal, I am for wind and solar. I want every possible method of producing energy in the United States. And by the way, when we go out and look, guess what's been happening? In North Dakota, where most of the oil is on private land, and therefore the government hasn't been able to stop the exploring, we've had a 2,500% increase in the reserves available in North Dakota. Because the new technology, new approaches, we have not had a serious geologic survey of our potential resources since 1984. So all the new technology, all the new ways of finding oil and gas, none of it's been applied by the U.S. Geological Survey because the environmentalists are afraid we'll find it. This is the willful ignorance model of governing, which they also apply, sadly, to many of our schools. Now, how do we turn all this into practical reality? Now, I understand that having been Speaker of the House, having passed fairly large bills, I believe there's a method, which I really learned from Ronald Reagan, that you don't actually govern in the Congress. You govern at home in the grassroots. That Reagan used to say, I turned the light up for the American people, so they turned the heat up on Congress. So I'm going to give you two sets. One is, I believe we need a contract with America in the fall of 2012 that has 7 big, major bills, one for sure on the economy and jobs and growth, and one for sure on the 10th Amendment Implementation Act. And we try to get every Republican for Congress and every Republican for the Senate to sign up. And we say to the country, you give us a majority, these will all be passed in the first 100 days. And since we'd be negotiating with me, and the bills would be bills we've already agreed to, I promise you I will sign the bills. And I would say that we should say to every Republican potential candidate, it would be really good and healthy to have a contract of a very small number, notice I said 7, that are very big and that change things decisively. But second, presidents have enormous power to issue executive orders that redefine the executive branch's operations within the boundaries of existing law. And so we're exploring the idea that whoever becomes president should have a project we're calling On the First Day. And imagine that you actually put the proposed executive orders on the internet, and you discuss them and you talk them out. And then you actually had people who used to work for Bush or Reagan write the executive orders so they're technically correct. And imagine that shortly after the inaugural address, there was a 1-hour break, and the newly elected president went into a room in the Capitol and signed the first 100 or 200 executive orders, and then went to lunch with the Congress. Now, I was in Iowa 2 weeks ago at a Faith and Freedom Coalition meeting, and I gave them 4 examples. I'll share these with you because they give you a flavor and get you to start thinking about it. I said, I thought whoever the next president was, if they were Republican, the very first executive order on the very first day should be to abolish all of the White House czars at that moment. Notice, this is not a traditional politician's promise. This isn't, gee, I sure am against those. This is like the first contract in '94. You can measure that. We can write it in advance. You can post it on the internet. You can know exactly what it is, executive order number 1. And then all it takes is a signature. Now, obviously, if Barack Obama gets reelected, he won't sign it. But it does give you the advantage if you find a couple that are really popular and he decides in the debates he's going to say, oh, I'd really be for that too. You just pull out the order and say, here, sign it. You're already president. I said in Iowa, maybe the second executive order ought to be to reinstate Ronald Reagan's Mexico City policy so none of your tax money pays for abortions anywhere in the world. I suggested third, that we should reinstate George W. Bush's language on enforcing the right of conscience so no person would be forced to perform an abortion against their religious beliefs. And I said fourth, we should immediately instruct the State Department as of that date that every country in the world is allowed to designate their own capital, and we will put the American embassy where the capital is designated, which specifically relates only to one country in the world. The only country that we refuse to allow to designate their own capital is Israel, and it is a disgrace that the leading stable democracy in the region is discriminated against by the State Department. Finally, let me just talk briefly about national security with everything that's going on in Libya. I believe the most important thing we can do in the near future on national security is ask the House and Senate to hold thorough, deep reviews of where we are in the 10 years since 9/11. I do not believe that we are winning. I believe the world is more dangerous, our enemies are more sophisticated, and our systems are less capable. And I think it's very sobering. When the leading Pakistani governor who advocated tolerance is killed by his own security guard, and our intelligence was so inadequate we didn't even realize that the security guard was a jihadist, why would you trust the rest of our intelligence? The only Christian member of the Pakistani cabinet was killed in the last month. 4 people who were helping the United States in northwest Pakistan were killed in the last week. Pakistan is a very unstable country which may in fact be gradually moving away from us, which will be truly a catastrophe. Afghanistan, I think we're on a mission that is, for all practical purposes, impossible. It is inconceivable to me as a historian that you can take a tribal society deeply rooted in the 12th century and in a reasonable period of time move it into the 21st century. You are asking, I think our troops can provide security. I think General Petraeus is a brilliant commander. But at the end of providing security, what you have is a country, 1/3 of whose economy comes from selling drugs, deeply riddled by corruption, in which the local communities are tribal, and in which women are remarkably repressed. Now, for us to try to go in there and change that in the length of time Americans normally give to projects, I believe is utterly hopeless. And we had better design a new strategy. And the strategy had better recognize that fundamental change in some of these regions is going to take 50 to 70 years, and we had better invent a solution for that. And that solution can't be American troops on the ground for 50 or 70 years. We will not sustain it. And furthermore, it's counterproductive, because we end up being the occupiers, not the liberators. It's a very serious problem for us, and one we have to deal with intellectually. From 1947 to 1949, we wrestled with the problem of the Soviet Union. Kennan's long telegram taught us the nature of the Soviet system. In December of 1949, Harry Truman decided we had to build a hydrogen bomb, whose only purpose was destroying cities. And the Secretary of State said to him, we had better invent a strategy to not use it. And so they asked Paul Nitze at the State Department Planning Board to invent the Cold War strategy. And on April 15, 1950, Harry Truman released NSC 68, National Security Council Memorandum 68, which really created what we did until 1991. And we systematically surrounded the Soviet Union diplomatically, militarily, economically, politically. We systematically tried to crowd them. But we also tried to avoid a world war. We sustained that as a people for 44 years. We sustained it while we grew richer, freer, more productive, technologically advanced. because we had designed a sustainable long strategy. We don't have today. Look, this administration can't even tell you the truth about who's trying to kill us. I mean, they have an Army officer jump up in Fort Hood, yell Allahu Akbar, and shoot 33 Americans, wounding them and killing 13. And the administration can't even admit the person might have been motivated by religion. They have somebody in Germany who jumps up, yells Allahu Akbar, and kills 2 Americans. And the administration wonders why they were involved in terrorism. You have a suicide bomber he's not a suicide bomber, he's a car bomber from Pakistan who comes to the U.S., gets citizenship, goes back home, leaves his family in Pakistan, takes a training course in a terrorist camp, comes back, creates a car bomb for Times Square, and the elites are so out of touch with reality and so desperate to avoid telling the truth that Mayor Bloomberg says on public television, you know, let's not rush to judgment. It could be somebody who is opposed to Obama's health plan. Now, I want you to think about that. There have been thousands of jihadist suicide bombers. To the best of my knowledge, there have been 0 health plan bombers. So what does it tell you about how out of touch with reality the elites are, how frightened they are of the truth? Talk about 2 + 2 = 911. And so you can't design, I mean, imagine we'd had a strategic debate in the late 1940s in which you couldn't use the word communist, you couldn't use the word Soviet, you couldn't discuss the Comintern, you couldn't explain the KGB. And you had to say, you know, on random days, Stalin seems a little strange. But I'm sure we can talk with him. We'd have lost all of our freedoms. So we need a fundamental rethinking. On Libya itself, presidents have to plan and execute professionally and then hold the press conference. When you hold the press conference before you plan, you get in real trouble. So on March 3rd, President Obama says Gaddafi has to go. Well, have you noticed since then? The State Department reported to the Congress on the War Powers Act on a Friday, and on Saturday said we are not at war. The President said Gaddafi has to go. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs said that's not our mission. The President said it will be a very short mission. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs said I have no idea how long it will take. The White House, the State Department, and the Defense Department have 4 different versions of what we're doing. The Germans have pulled out. The French have agreed to lead it, but only if their mission is not our mission. The French want to kill tanks. And, I mean, this is a no-fly zone, right? All these liberal lawyers say we're going to have a no-fly zone. And they start killing tanks. Now, I know a fair amount about technology. I mean, how many Libyan flying tanks do you think there were? And don't misunderstand me. I am perfectly prepared for us to side with the Libyan people against Gaddafi. I said in late February, we should help the Libyan people become free without using American military power by getting every possible ally in the Arab world, reinforcing the people who want to be free, and spreading the word through the Libyan military, you are going to lose. It's better for you to desert Gaddafi and survive than it is for you to stick with him. Now, I think there were strategies that Eisenhower and Reagan would have approved of. They didn't involve publicly saying he has to leave and then doing nothing for 2 weeks. I mean, think about the sequence. Look at you have a spectator-in-chief instead of a commander-in-chief, and it is very dangerous for the security of the United States to have somebody who doesn't understand their job. Finally, on national security, something of direct relevance to North Carolina. This White House said last night they are not going to ask for a supplemental because they're going to take the Libyan campaign out of the current defense budget. We should not allow liberals to rip off the Pentagon budget for Obama's adventures. The fact is, the military is overstretched. We are undercapitalized. We are not modernizing fast enough to keep up with China. Our infantry and our Army and our Marines are overstretched in Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, and Iraq. And we have an obligation to say to the young men and women who put their lives at risk, when your president asks you to do something, we are going to fully fund it to ensure that we can sustain the defense of the United States. Let me just close with this thought for all of you. And I say this from the depth of my being. I've been active since August of 1958. My dad was a career soldier in the infantry. And I've really tried to understand what America has to do to survive and be free and prosperous and safe. How to explain that to the American people so they'll give us permission to do it. And how to implement it so we can be effective. But in the end, we're in so much trouble in so many different ways that no politician can come here and tell you, elect me and I'll fix it. We're going to need 311 million citizens who decide that their country's worth working, volunteering, helping. We're going to return power back home, and that means you're actually going to have a bigger burden of citizenship because you won't just be able to blame the bureaucrats. But you have a chance, I think, unlike anybody since 1932. You're going to have a moment for the next year and a half when you can go to your neighbors, you can electronically go to your friends across the country. You can have a conversation about these two futures: American exceptionalism, European secular socialism. Jobs, competition, investment, productivity, bureaucracy, unemployment, food stamps, safety and profound professional methods that we know work, total opportunistic amateurism of enormous danger. And you're going to be able to say to folks, this is our best chance in a generation to put America back on the right track. And we need to do it at every level, from school board to city council to county commission to state legislature to governor to Congress to the presidency. With your help, there are enough people in this room who have enough Facebook friends and email friends and Twitter friends, just in this room. You can help start a revolution that returns power to the American people and gives our children and grandchildren once again the greatest, freest, safest country in the history of the world. Thank you, good luck, and God bless you.